The proverbial cat with 9 lives. His popularity is soaring at home again, and what Israel can learn from its previous wars with Lebanon. How does India view this conflict? What's our defense against, say, pager attacks? I put these questions to the Army Chief of India today in an exclusive interview. In Russia, they've raised the defense budget to prop up the economy. We'll explain how. In China, they celebrated the National Day today, but there was no big party, just bleak prophecies about the future from Xi Jinping. Same with Nigeria, an Independence Day marred by protests. In California, a new law protects your brain data. As neurotechnology evolves, the whole world needs such laws. And Mount Everest is growing taller. We'll tell you why. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Is Iran preparing to attack Israel? The US believes so. Washington claims a ballistic missile attack by Tehran is imminent. The White House says it is ready to defend Israel. The US has also warned Iran that such an action will have severe consequences. Israel says no aerial threat detected from Iran so far. In India, doctors in Kolkata are back on strike. They want the Mamata Banerjee government to accept their demands, which include better hospital security and health infrastructure. On 21st September, the doctors had called off their 42-day strike. The protest started over the rape and murder of a doctor at the RG Kar Medical College. US vice presidential contenders J.D. Vance and Tim Walz will face off later tonight. The 90-minute debate will have no live audience and no fact-checking by the moderators. Both candidates are military veterans with strong blue-collar credentials. The debate is likely to be the last one of the 2024 election. A Tunisian presidential candidate is jailed for 12 years. The front-runner is the incumbent president who was elected in 2019. Later, he orchestrated a sweeping power grab by dissolving parliament. The North African country goes to polls on 6th October. And Bhutan unveils plans for its mindfulness city. The move aims to attract foreign investment and international travelers. The project was announced last December. The Himalayan kingdom is struggling with widespread unemployment, which has forced thousands to leave the country.
Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that?
We should have a ceasefire now.
ולהבטיח את גבולנו המזרחי מול ידינו. זה גבול של שלום.
Joe Biden's appeals are falling on deaf ears. Israel is expanding the war. After Gaza, it has launched an operation in Lebanon, a ground offensive, the first of its kind since 2006. Israeli troops have been mobilized for what they're calling a limited operation. The IDF, or the Israeli Defense Force, says that it is conducting targeted raids along the border and its troops are yet to enter Lebanon. But it may just be a matter of time because Lebanon already looks like a war zone, coming under a full-scale assault.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. بنت الصراط بس.
How many soldiers are part of this operation? Israel says it has deployed one army division. Typically, one division has more than 10,000 troops. The IDF has not confirmed any numbers, but the pictures speak for themselves. This appears to be a large-scale attack. Israel is also conducting airstrikes. But there are no reports of direct clashes yet. Clashes between Israeli troops and Hezbollah fighters. No reports of that yet. Israel says it is striking Lebanon from outside the border, and Hezbollah says the same, that no Israeli soldier has entered Lebanon yet. Last night, some pictures surfaced on social media. Take a look at this first. Now, we haven't been able to verify this. But these are Lebanese troops. Apparently, they were deployed near the southern border. Early reports claimed that Lebanon had pulled these soldiers back or that they left their posts. But a few hours ago, the Lebanese military has denied all such reports. They said that the troops were not pulled back. Instead, they were simply redeployed. They could be preparing for a bigger attack from Israel. That's the Lebanese version. Meanwhile, the IDF is asking locals to vacate the border areas, especially in southern Lebanon that shares the border with Israel, southern Lebanon. The Israeli military has issued warnings to locals there, to residents in at least 30 villages, asking them to leave. Save your lives. That was the message from the Israeli military spokesperson. He posted it in Arabic on social media. Save your lives. More than 1 million people have already been displaced in Lebanon. Israel has been pounding Beirut as well. That's the capital city of Lebanon. They say that they're going after the Hezbollah and dismantling their bases.
Hezbollah turned Lebanese villages next to Israeli villages into military bases, all ready for an attack on Israel. Hezbollah had prepared to use those villages as staging grounds for an October 7th style invasion into Israeli homes.
The entire situation is spinning out of control. Israel's operations have raised tensions across the region. They've sparked clashes in the West Bank. Israel conducted a military raid there too. In the West Bank, there was an exchange of fire. The locals fired upon Israeli forces and the Israeli army retaliated. At least one Palestinian is dead and 4 Israeli soldiers are injured. Israel is also defending itself against a barrage of rockets. Look at this map. It was published by their Air Force. There are red marks everywhere, pretty much covering the entire Israeli territory. Its air defense system intercepted rockets in all these areas. Air raid sirens were heard across Israel through the day today. These rockets came from the north. They were fired by the Hezbollah. They did not cause any significant damage, but they delivered a clear message from the Lebanese side. Israel may have taken out top Hezbollah commanders, including its leader Hassan Nasrallah. Israel may have left the Hezbollah weakened, but it is not defenseless. That was the message. That's what these rockets were supposed to convey. They were a demonstration of the Hezbollah's capabilities, proof that they can strike targets deep inside Israel. You see, Hezbollah still has long-range rockets in its arsenal, and it's not afraid to use them. In fact, that's the mood in Beirut as well.
In my opinion, there is only a small possibility that Israel will be able to penetrate because the resistance remains strong. And if Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is gone, there are thousands of alternatives to Hassan Nasrallah.
The Zionist entity is doomed to collapse, and the martyr Hassan Nasrallah, God rest his soul, said something beautiful. He said hello and welcome because Israel will not finish what they started.
The Hezbollah is getting support from Yemen as well, from the Houthi rebels in Yemen. They launched drones towards Israel today. The Houthis targeted 2 Israeli cities, Tel Aviv and Eilat. The Houthis say that they were aiming for Israeli military posts.
The drone forces of the Yemeni armed forces targeted a military target belonging to the Israeli enemy in the occupied Jaffa area, using a Jaffa-type drone. It also targeted military targets in the al-Rashrash, Eilat area with 4 Samad 4-type drones. By the grace of God Almighty, both operations successfully achieved their objectives.
The Houthis claim that their mission was successful, but Israel has countered the claim. The IDF says that it intercepted Houthi drones. Irrespective, Netanyahu knows that enemy attacks are far from over. If Israel keeps striking Lebanon, Iran and its proxies will hit back. But will they be able to cause any damage? That's our next story. Israel's actions have not been legal, nor have they been responsible. But you cannot deny that they have been effective. Just consider the last 2 months. First, Israel killed the Hamas chief in Tehran. Then they killed the Hezbollah chief in Beirut. This is deep inside enemy territory. To attack with such precision is quite impressive. The question is, how did they do it? How did Israel do it? Thanks to a vast network of espionage. We're talking about multiple moving parts here. You've got cyber surveillance, you've got satellite images, you've got moles and double agents, all of them combined to pinpoint these targets. Let's look at each of these parts. The first is cyber espionage. Let me take you back to the year 2006. Israel and Hezbollah fought to a standstill. After 34 days of war, there was no clear victor. Israeli agencies felt humiliated and disappointed, so they quickly got to work. Their military has a special unit called Unit 8200. Its job is to collect enemy information. How? By intercepting cell phone messages or hacking mobile devices. After the 2006 war, this unit went into overdrive. They developed cutting-edge spying devices. Now, Hezbollah did suspect this, which is why they turned to pagers instead of mobile phones. They started using pagers, but Israel was one step ahead of them. They set up a shell company to supply these pagers to Hezbollah. After that, it was a question of sabotaging them, putting bombs in and shipping them. Chances are this was a cross-agency operation. The Mossad, the Israeli Defense Forces, the Unit 8200, all of them coordinated to complete it. And that's a feature of Israeli intelligence. Yes, there are multiple agencies, but the work is seamless. There is great coordination between them. Now, coming back to Lebanon, Israel's new focus gave them results. In 2008, they killed a top Hezbollah leader, Imad Mughniya. In 2020, they traced Iran's Qasem Soleimani to Beirut and then to Baghdad. And in July this year, they killed a Hezbollah commander, Fuad Shukur, all thanks to intelligence, which brings us to the second part of Israel's campaign, penetration, moles and double agents. Israel specializes in this sort of stuff. It's called human intelligence or HUMINT. Using individuals in the enemy ranks to gather intelligence. That's what it is. Israel's been doing it for a while. In the 1960s, they had a spy in Syria, Eli Cohen. In the 1980s, they had one in Egypt, Ashraf Marwan. He tipped them off about the Yom Kippur War. But how does Israel manage this network? Creating a few moles is hard enough. Israel is said to have dozens, possibly hundreds of moles. Of course, their tactics are mostly classified, but intelligence leaks do give us an idea of how they do it. The honey trap is a usual tactic. Israel uses prostitutes to lure their targets, photographs them, and then uses the pictures as leverage. They also send agents abroad to seduce certain officials, like secretaries at embassies or even flight attendants. The idea is to keep tabs on who's flying in and out. And finally, they use money. Israel pays their moles and double agents quite well. Consider Ashraf Marwan, the spy in Egypt. He got between $50,000 and $100,000 for every tip-off, plus bonuses and gifts. A lot of these officials are sanctioned by the West. They live on meager government salaries, so such payments may sound lucrative. And look at the result. Israel's former president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, has made a revelation. He said that Iran has a special unit to tackle Israeli moles. Iran has a special unit to tackle Israeli moles, but guess what? The man heading that unit was himself an Israeli mole. So were 20 others with him. Now, Ahmadinejad may not be a reliable source. He has a history of wild statements, but he's not alone in saying this. A former foreign minister said the same thing in 2021. He said Israel had penetrated the upper echelons of Iran's regime. So to sum it up, Israel has done many things right. First, they have invested in intelligence. Israel allocates more than $2 billion to Mossad. They are well funded and well staffed. Secondly, they keep up with the times. They've used letter bombs, armed drones, exploding cell phones, exploding pagers, exploding motorcycles. You name it, they've done it. And third, patience. Intelligence is often a long-term game. Like I said, they began focusing on the Hezbollah way back in 2006. They've been tracking Nasrallah all along. But when did that investment come in handy? Nearly 18 years later. Israel has been willing to get its hands dirty to walk on the moral grey area, but things don't always go to plan. Like what happened on October 7, 2023, last year. Israel was blindsided by the Hamas attack, so intelligence is not always 100% accurate. Even when you get a tip-off, it can be wrong. Which brings us to the fourth thing that Israel does. They take risks. A lot of governments may think twice about such attacks. They may not act on such intel, but Israel does. Their leadership is willing to gamble. When it pays off, Israel looks invincible. And when it doesn't, their Western godfathers mop up after them. The leader who keeps coming back from election defeats, from corruption cases and from grave strategic mistakes. Benjamin Netanyahu is arguably the biggest comeback kid. But that's not necessarily a good thing because his comebacks have come at a cost. A cost not borne by him, but by innocent people in West Asia. First, some background. Benjamin Netanyahu has pitched himself as Mr. Security, the leader who would always protect Israel. But that image took a beating on October 7th last year. On his watch, Hamas attacked Israel. They killed more than 1,700 innocent civilians, also took hundreds of people hostage. Immediately, Netanyahu's approval ratings plunged. Only 15% Israelis wanted him to keep the job. The rest wanted him to step aside, to resign. So what did Netanyahu do? He went rogue, even ignored his most important ally, the US. Their President Biden had set many red lines for Netanyahu, like don't invade Rafah, don't attack civilian infrastructure, and don't hold up humanitarian aid. But Netanyahu ignored all of it. When the US negotiated a ceasefire, he rejected that too. Many Israelis wanted Netanyahu to take the deal, especially the families of hostages. But he was defiant. He said the war would go on. Then midway into 2024, he expanded it, the war. Netanyahu began targeting Iranian assets in the region, even took out some Iranian commanders. This triggered the first ever direct attack by Tehran on Israel. Again, Netanyahu was unfazed. He killed the Hamas chief in Tehran and he killed the Hezbollah chief in Lebanon. The US had explicitly warned against that last operation, killing the Hezbollah chief. They feared that killing Nasrallah would trigger war. So what did Netanyahu do? He did not tell Biden at all. He ordered the strike from New York on American soil. He used American bombs to kill Nasrallah and then he informed Biden afterwards. Talk about utter disrespect. Netanyahu has played Biden like a fiddle. Just consider the recent ceasefire call. 12 nations came together to release that statement. It asked Israel and Hezbollah to stop fighting for 21 days. Privately, Netanyahu said okay, but when the statement was released, he backtracked. He said there would be no ceasefire in the north. For good measure, he also killed the Hezbollah chief. And the strange part? These rogue tactics are helping him. Assume that general elections are held today in Israel. Polls show that Netanyahu's party will emerge as the biggest. He may not win outright, but he will be the biggest player. Around 38% Israelis now support him. That's more than double from last year. Even his rivals realize that the tide is turning. One of them, Gideon Sa'ar, has joined Netanyahu's coalition. It takes his strength to 68 seats in Israel's parliament. That's 68 out of 120 seats in the Knesset. Now, just to be clear, this does not mean the war in Gaza is popular in Israel. Most Israelis still want a hostage deal. Yesterday, a major protest was held outside Netanyahu's residence. They asked him to end the war in Gaza.
We came to the house of the Prime Minister of Israel to tell him that we expect him to turn.
A little bit earlier in the program about the fact that we have seen missiles raining down from Hezbollah in Lebanon into Israel since October 8th, so for a year. And we obviously know what Hamas had done inside Israel and what was going on the southern border. But this is different, and I think we need to underscore this for our viewers. This is Iran. This is Iran not using its proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas, but Iran itself launching this missile attack on Israel. And can you explain how this, just based on what you're saying, how this is different from what we saw in the middle of April, which didn't cause any destruction because Israel and its allies came in and stopped it? They were obviously given a heads up about it. Why is this different?
Well, this is different for several reasons, Dana. And what I'd suggest is, in watching the screen, you can't determine with the naked eye what kind of missiles and what kind of rockets are coming in. I would suggest that there's the potential for both these missiles and rockets coming in from both Lebanon, out of Hezbollah's areas, but also potentially from Iran. You saw the strikes going on against the missiles that were incoming. Those could have also been jet engines that are looking, using their radars to determine launches and potential strike areas. And there's an integrated air defense system where an aircraft can determine an incoming missile, get it to the ground station, and have the ground station fire upward. Jeremy Diamond was absolutely right when he said some of the explosions were likely going on above the atmosphere. That's how you engage a ballistic missile that's now re-entering the orbit to strike a target. But what I saw was the potential for both rockets, which are unguided for the most part, they're not precise, and ballistic missiles potentially coming in. I couldn't define that there were ballistic missiles, but it sure looked like it to me. So you've got you've got multiple rocket missiles coming in, which overwhelms the air defense system of Israel. You also, what I saw was multiple ground explosions, and that tells me that a lot of them didn't hit targeted areas, and we're likely going to see civilian casualties from Tel Aviv.
All right, General, thank you. I want to go to Nick Robertson, who is in Haifa, Israel, north of Tel Aviv, but south of where we have seen Jeremy Diamond this hour. What are you seeing there in the port city of Haifa, Nick?
The skies are quiet over Haifa. This will be a very difficult target for Israel, for Iran to reach, rather, because it would mean flying missiles all the way across Israel's territory, which would give Israel an opportunity to intercept them. Nevertheless, there are in this region very sensitive targets. And I think if we just take a half step back and understand why Iran has decided to do this. It has decided to do this very clearly as a statement of support for Hezbollah. And that means Iran has an extreme interest in protecting Hezbollah to the north, that Israel has started attacking and has a ground operation against as of the last almost 24 hours.
Nick, I need to go over to Jim Sciutto, our colleague in Tel Aviv. Forgive me for interrupting. Jim.
All right, Dana, we're on the roof. To be clear, we went into the shelter. We went into the shelter in between the air raid sirens. We've come out again because this is the second round of air raid sirens we've seen. And if you look over here in the distance, you're seeing where the intercepts are going up into the sky. And it would be, just to be clear, from that direction from the east. And again, listen, this gives you a sense of the air defenses all around Tel Aviv. Multiple layers, and this up further in the sky where I'm pointing here, that's the altitude where they're making impacts. We saw multiple impacts on the first barrage, and some of those fragments or missiles themselves hit not far from the hotel, I want to say, perhaps, and now we're seeing what they're attempting to intercept in the sky. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my team off the roof again to go back into the shelter because they're getting close, and when these come down, they can come close to us. Guys, let's go back into the shelter. We'll check in once it's safe again.
Please, thank you, Jim. I want to go to Alex Marquardt, who is also doing reporting and talking to his sources about the potential impact of what we are seeing? Obviously, it is still ongoing, Alex.
Well, Dana, the whole question since the death of the killing of Nasrallah by Israel last week was when and how Iran would respond. And now, of course, we are seeing that response. So what we're trying to get at is really the scale of this response, particularly when it compares to what we saw back on April 13th, when more than 300 missiles and drones were fired at Israel, frankly, without much impact. And the reason that there was not much impact was because of this U.S.-led coalition that helped the Israeli forces to defend their skies. And there really was not that much damage or destruction. So what we're seeing now is a significant amount of activity in the air. We may also be seeing impacts on the ground. So that will certainly play into what the Israeli response would be. But there is a lot of fog of war right now. We really need to figure out what exactly is being fired at Israel and what those strikes are going to entail in terms of damage. But then there's the question about the defense of Israel. The U.S. has been preparing for this kind of scenario for quite some time. You remember a couple of months ago, after the killing of the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, Israel and the U.S. were then expecting an Iranian response that frankly never came. So there has been this framework in place that we're now seeing being put into action to defend Israel. Dana?
All right, thank you so much, Alex. I do want to go back to Nick Robertson and pick up where you left off before, Nick, talking about how Iran is trying to, this is a show of force, this is an attack on Israel as a way to show its support for Hezbollah. You heard Alex talking about the last time in April Iran sent missiles that were intercepted. It was after there was an actual strike, Israeli strike inside Iran, Tehran, where they took out a leader there. And this is different.
This is different. Last time Iran telegraphed several days in advance, it was understood what they were going to do. They sent drones, which are slow. They sent cruise missiles, which are a little bit faster but slow. And then they sent a few ballistic missiles. As far as we're aware this time, predominantly this is ballistic missiles, which are